Carol's life had been far from easy. She could still feel the cold chill that spread through her body when her second husband aimed a gun at her and pulled the trigger 6 times. She survived, but the blood transfusion she received during surgery was contaminated with hepatitis C, and years later she tested positive for liver cancer. In 2000, when Carol finally felt ready to work again, she took a job as a call center manager. One day, while taking calls, she experienced a moment of pure chance. On the other end of the line was Reggie Sumner, her old high school boyfriend. Carol and Reggie had been sweethearts in 1960, but life had taken them down different paths, and they had spent nearly 40 years apart. When the two reconnected, it wasn't long before they rekindled their old flame. About a year later, they got married. Now, both were 61 years old. Less than a year into their marriage, they decided to sell their home in South Carolina and move to Jacksonville, Florida. It was time to enjoy their retirement. Their retirement plans didn't sit well with Rhonda, who wanted to stay close to her mother. However, her mother's wishes came first. So, with a mixture of reluctance and love, she bid them a fond farewell as they embarked on their new journey. Carol and Reggie were ready to start enjoying their new life together and embrace the joys of their fresh start. Even though her mother had moved to a different city, Rhonda stayed in close contact with her, speaking regularly on the phone. But on July 10th, 2005, something felt wrong. She hadn't heard from Carol or Reggie in the past 24 hours. Rhonda knew her mother was battling liver cancer, and Reggie was in poor health himself, struggling with diabetes and a broken leg. The silence was unsettling. Reggie was mostly confined to a wheelchair, so the couple might have needed help. When Rhonda hadn't heard from them for 3 days, she decided to visit their home. Upon arriving, she noticed that Reggie's car was not in the driveway. The thought crossed her mind that they might have gone out, but that idea quickly faded when she found the front door unlocked. As she stepped inside, an unsettling scene greeted her. The table was covered with stale food, suggesting that the couple had left in a hurry. Carol's daily medications, her cell phone, and dirty dishes by the sink were all left behind. Even if they had gone somewhere, there was no way they would have left the house in such a state. Rhonda reported the couple missing, and authorities quickly spread the word, launching an investigation. Unfortunately, no one had seen them, and no information surfaced. But then, a short time later, Reggie's car was discovered abandoned in a remote wooded area. Yet there was still no trace of the couple. As investigators considered various possibilities, the mystery only deepened. Shortly afterward, a call came in from a man claiming to be Reggie. He said he had seen the news and assured everyone that there was nothing to worry about. They had left the city for a while, but would be returning soon. However, something didn't seem right. The caller's voice didn't match that of a 61-year-old man. Instead, it sounded much younger, raising suspicions. The authorities played along, keeping the caller on the line as long as possible. When they asked if Carol could come to the phone, a woman's voice emerged. She too stuck to the same story, but her voice sounded far too young to be Carol's. The growing suspicion could only be confirmed by one person: her daughter. It only took Rhonda a few seconds of listening to the recordings to realize the truth. The voices did not belong to her mother or Reggie. It was obvious. The police were now certain that the two callers were lying, and it seemed likely that they were somehow involved in the couple's disappearance. As investigators pursued financial leads, they requested a trace on the phone call to uncover the truth. Meanwhile, it was discovered that large sums of money had been withdrawn from Reggie's account after the couple's disappearance, using his bank card. The police contacted the bank and obtained the ATM's security footage, revealing that the person making the withdrawals was not Reggie, but an unidentified young man. His age appeared to match the approximate age of the callers. At the same time, the trace on the suspicious phone number came back. It was registered under a fake name and address, but there was a breakthrough. The same number had recently been used to contact a car rental company. When investigators visited the rental agency, they learned that a vehicle had been rented by a woman named Tiffany Cole. Moreover, the description of the rented car matched the one seen parked outside the ATM where the withdrawals had taken place. Things were finally starting to come into focus. Whoever had been making the calls was likely traveling in the same rented car. The next step was to track the vehicle. Fortunately, all rental cars in the company's inventory were equipped with GPS tracking. The authorities traced the car to a hotel in South Carolina, near Carol and Reggie's former home. It was parked in a side street, and the police were able to obtain the room numbers of the guests who had arrived in the vehicle. 3 people had checked in, and there was a chance that two of them could be Carol and Reggie. When the officers knocked on the door, it swung open, but there was no sign of Carol or Reggie inside. Instead, they found Tiffany Cole, her boyfriend Michael Jackson, and their friend Alan Wade. The room was filled with expensive items, including bags, laptops, cell phones, as well as Reggie's car keys and his coin collection. Even if there was no other evidence, these two items alone were enough to justify taking the suspects in for questioning. It didn't take long before the three friends found themselves in separate interrogation rooms, being questioned one by one. Initially, they all tried to act as if they knew nothing, but after some time, Tiffany admitted that it had been a robbery attempt, though she insisted they had nothing to do with the elderly couple's disappearance. She also revealed that a fourth person, named Bruce Nixon, had been involved. Bruce was soon apprehended, and unlike the other three, he quickly confessed to the truth. However, the reality was far more horrifying, cruel, and heartbreaking than anyone had anticipated. It all began with Tiffany. Before I reveal the dreadful truth, let me explain the connection between Tiffany and the missing Carol and Reggie. Tiffany knew Carol and Reggie from the time when they all lived in South Carolina. They were neighbors, and before the elderly couple moved, they had sold Tiffany their car for next to nothing. In late June 2005, Tiffany and her boyfriend Michael visited the couple's new home to finalize the paperwork for the car. They ended up staying the night, and during dinner, Carol spoke about their peaceful new life and casually mentioned the $99,000 they had made from selling their old house. The moment that number was spoken, Tiffany and Michael exchanged a glance, a silent agreement. Right then and there, they decided to hatch a sinister plan to rob the couple, whom they saw as easy targets due to their age and health issues. That amount of money could solve most of their financial problems and help them start living a more luxurious life. The couple had an advantage. Tiffany already knew everything about Carol and Reggie, but to avoid drawing attention to themselves, Tiffany and Michael decided it would be wiser to stay in the background and let their friends, Alan and Bruce, carry out the dirty work. On the night of July 8, 2005, Alan and Bruce knocked on the elderly couple's door, claiming that their car had broken down and they needed to use the phone for help. Carol was hesitant and felt a twinge of fear, but her kindness got the better of her, and she decided to let the strangers in. As soon as they stepped inside, the men slammed the door shut and pounced on the helpless woman. Hearing the commotion, Reggie came to see what was happening, but he too was quickly subdued. The attackers disabled the phone line and, at gunpoint, forced the terrified couple to comply. They wrapped them head to toe in duct tape, leaving only a small gap to allow for breathing. Alan then took out his phone and sent a message to Michael and Tiffany, who were waiting in the rented car down the road, saying that everything was going as planned. While Tiffany stayed in the car, Michael rushed to the house, and the three of them ransacked the entire home, gathering all the valuables they could find. But material possessions weren't the only thing they were after. The bulk of the couple's wealth was in the bank, and to access it, they needed the account details. Reggie, in his weakened state, would likely have given up the information if asked. But the robbers chose to continue tormenting the couple instead. With their stolen valuables in tow, they forced the frail, taped-up bodies of Carol and Reggie into the trunk of the couple's car, bending and twisting them to fit. The group then set out on a journey that would take about 40 minutes. Bruce drove Tiffany's car, while Alan and Michael used Reggie's. Both vehicles headed northwest, towards a desolate wooded area. During the ride, as the car bumped along, Carol and Reggie's bodies began to sweat in the hot, cramped trunk, causing the tape to loosen. Although they managed to free themselves from the bindings, the confined space left them with no room to move, and they couldn't open the trunk. With no other options, they clung to each other, desperately hoping for mercy. When they arrived at the wooded area, they didn't have to search for a suitable spot. The location had already been prepared in advance. 2 days earlier, in the middle of the night, they had dug a massive 5-meter deep pit using 4 shovels stolen by Bruce. When the trunk was opened, Carol and Reggie, who had freed themselves from the tape and were now clinging to each other, could see their assailants clearly. Among them was Tiffany, the young woman they had treated like a daughter. Her betrayal was truly despicable. Standing before the gaping pit, Carol clung to her husband, burying her face in his back in terror. The robbers stripped the couple of their jewelry and valuables, then demanded the bank account details. Reggie, desperate to keep himself and his wife alive, complied without hesitation. But there was a question that haunted them. Why were they not being set free? If the robbers had already gotten what they wanted, why were they still being held captive? The answer was far more sinister than they could have imagined. Ignoring the couple's desperate pleas, the attackers forced them toward the edge of the pit and pushed them in. Rather than ending their suffering quickly with a gunshot, they chose the most brutal path. They would bury them alive. At the bottom of the pit, Carol wrapped her arms and legs around Reggie, resting her head on his chest, as tears streamed down her face. As they continued to cry out for mercy, the first shovelfuls of dirt began to cover them. They struggled to rise, to at least push their noses above the earth for air, but it was no use. The soil quickly filled their mouths and nostrils, suffocating them. As the attackers walked away, faint muffled cries and tremors came from beneath the ground. Nothing could save the couple from their tragic fate. After leaving the scene, Tiffany, Michael, Alan, and Bruce abandoned Reggie's car and used Tiffany's rental to drive to an ATM, where they withdrew all the cash they could. They later rented a limousine, celebrated with champagne, and took pictures holding fistfuls of cash. This was how they chose to celebrate, by spending thousands of dollars that belonged to the couple they had murdered just hours before. A few days after Carol's daughter contacted the authorities, on July 14th, police used GPS to track down Tiffany, Michael, and Alan in a hotel room. Inside, they found the victim's identification, credit cards, checkbooks, and other incriminating evidence that further linked the suspects to the crime. All three were immediately arrested, and during questioning, denied any involvement. But at one point, Bruce's name came up. Bruce was soon apprehended, and unlike the others, he confessed to his involvement. He led the authorities to the burial site of the missing couple. When the grave was dug up, the bodies of Carol and Reggie were found 2 meters below the surface, crouched and holding each other. The duct tape used during the crime was also recovered. The autopsy confirmed what the police had already suspected. Carol and Reggie had been alive when they were buried and died from suffocation as the dirt was piled on top of them. The soil had been inhaled into their mouths, throats, nasal passages, and airways, crushing their lungs and suffocating them where they lay. Due to his cooperation in solving the case, Bruce received a 45-year prison sentence without a trial. Alan and Michael, claiming their innocence, faced the court. But the overwhelming evidence against them led to both being sentenced to death. Tiffany, in her defense, argued that she didn't know the couple would be killed, maintaining her innocence. However, she was the only one who had known the victims before the crime and had facilitated the group's arrival at the scene. In 2007, during her trial, the jury found her guilty of first-degree murder, and she too was sentenced to death. However, in 2017, Tiffany's death sentence was overturned, and she was given life in prison instead. Alan's death sentence was also later reduced. Now Michael's the only one awaiting execution. Carol and Reggie had found each other again after so many years, and were finally beginning to enjoy a happy life together. The manner of their death was one of the most heartless crimes I've ever come across. It makes you wonder, could there be someone in my own circle capable of setting such a trap for me? Hopefully not. Please don't forget to share your thoughts and opinions in the comments about what happened to Carol and Reggie, as well as the sentences given to the perpetrators.